Good morning, everybody. On behalf of Indian National Academy of Engineering and on behalf of Indian Nuclear Society, I welcome you all to this 8th webinar of INA Mumbai chapter, which is being jointly organized with INS. Special welcome to today's speaker, Sri S.K. Sharma, a very busy person. Thank you, sir, and welcome. And it's my proud privilege to welcome Sri S.K. Mehta, who is president of INS, and he's a fellow of Indian National Academy of Engineering. His name is well known amongst the nuclear fraternity, whereas for the others, we have already circulated his profile in our flyer. At this point, I just wanted to mention that he is one of our assets who is equally comfortable in working in the design, review, regulation, operations, and also in projects of small and medium-sized nuclear reactors. It is very strong mechanical background and lots of experiences. Still today, he is an authority in this SMRs, which is a very important topic today, nationally and internationally. We welcome you, sir. We have with us many other senior members of INS and INA. We welcome all of you. With us, we have today Dr. Grover, who is already known to this platform. And at this moment, I think I must introduce our platform partners, Sri Anantakrishnan and his digital team of INA, and Sri Shobit Rai and his IT team in INA head office. Thank you all. With this small introduction, may I now request Sri Mehta to take over and give his introductory remark. Thank you, sir.
Generous introduction. I welcome, good morning, and welcome to all people participating in this seminar. On behalf of the Indian Nuclear Society, I have the honor to extend a very warm welcome to the members of the Indian National Academy of Engineers, Department of Atomic Energy members, Nuclear Power Corporation members, and other special invitees. We are extremely happy the webinar is being co-sponsored by INE and Indian Nuclear Society. We look forward to such collaboration in future for lectures of mutual interest. Back in late 50s, you may recall that based on the limited availability of uranium, abundant supply of thorium, Dr. Bhabha made a 3-stage program of thermal reactors, fast reactors, reactors, utilization of thorium-233. Even today, the resources of natural uranium in the world, that in India, has improved considerably. But our strategy of utilization of the resources for the Indian condition remains still the valid. Nuclear Power Corporation of India is under the Department of Atomic Energy, has the mandate to generate nuclear power using thermal reactors. And India has 2 major type of reactors, that is pressurized heavy water reactors and light water reactors. Our pressurized heavy water reactors, which uses natural uranium, after initial collaboration with the Canadians, and NPCL has mastered the technology of designing, development, production, and operation of liquid power plant with the with the initial start of the 220 megawatt at Aurora, then to 500 megawatts. The NPCL recently commissioned a 700 megawatt nuclear power plant incorporating the modern safety features and provisions to meet the international standards. To augment the power generation, there is a collaboration with the established international suppliers for supply of light water reactors, and two such units are operating in India. NPCL, with a number of years of experience, is now well equipped and organized to execute future nuclear power programs and with the current standards of safety as required by the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board. And I had a honor to be associated with the review of the various power plants. In our previous webinar, Dr. Kakotkar talked about the energy in India in a carbon-constrained world. And Dr. Grover lecture was on raising transient carbon, low carbon electricity mix. India is committed at the international level to reduce the carbon burden in the power generation sector. Utilization of nuclear energy to generate clean electric power would be a significant factor to meet the international commitment. With the above background, we considered it important that the member of the scientific community and general public should be well informed about the significance of the nuclear power program and its relevance to the commitment of reduction of carbon burden in power generation, thus serve the humanity. We are extremely thankful to Shri Satish Kumar Sharma, MD, CMD, PCL, having agreed to deliver this lecture today on the outlook of the nuclear power in India, utility prospect. Shri Sharma is endowed with a very rich professional experience of working in diverse functional aspect area of operational maintenance, nuclear power plant, spanning over 40 years. He held several key positions, like that of the station director, site director, before taking over responsible director of the station. Today, he is the managing director. He was deputed to the World Association of Nuclear Operator, that is WANO, based in Tokyo, where his extensive technical knowledge and extensive experience, he made significant contribution towards improving the safety of and reliability of nuclear power plant across the globe. We heartily welcome you, Sharmaji, and we invite you to deliver your lecture. Thank you very much. You are welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your kind introduction. Good morning to all the participants in today's webinar. Today, I will be sharing some of my thoughts about the outlook for nuclear power in India. The top left quartile of this slide shows share of various technologies in the installed capacity as it stands in February 2021. And the bottom left quartile shows how it is likely to look or expected to look 6 years down the line. Here, I would like you to notice the shrinking share of the coal and lignite and increasing share of the renewables. And of course, the growth in the total electricity which is expected to take place from 379 gigawatts to something like 619 gigawatt. This top right quartile shows the same share, but share in the generation. And the relative size of these slices indicates the effect of plant load factors typical to various technologies. For example, Although the share of nuclear in the installed capacity is barely 1.7%, its share in the total generation was almost double at 3.3%. The electrical scene in India is characterized by low per capita electricity consumption, growing population, and a developing economy aspiring for higher human development index. Now I will be sharing some of the factors which influence the emerging energy mix. In the 21st Conference of Parties held in Paris in 2015, the parties agreed to limit global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial era. Accordingly, recognizing the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, intended nationally determined contributions were announced by various countries, and India on its part voluntarily agreed for 33 to 35% reduction in emission intensity of GDP 2005 level. Recently, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India has submitted its third biennial update report to UNFCCC in the month of February, and the report is based upon the data up to year 2016. It brings out very clearly that already a reduction of 24% has been achieved by the year 2016. Similarly, the country had set a target of having 40% non-fossil fuel-based power generation by the year 2030. Now, if you look at my previous slide, the share of these non-fossil fuel-based power sources in the installed capacity is already 38% and about 25% in the generation. As a short-term target, the goal was to attain a capacity of 175 gigawatt of green energy by December 2022, and we are already at 146 gigawatt. So we have done rather well with respect to our INDCs. Later in 2018, IPCC launched a special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. The report argues that consequences of 2 degrees Celsius rise may not be acceptable, and a target of 1.5 degrees Celsius may be more appropriate. It further goes on to indicate that now the focus should shift from reducing the GHG emissions to attaining non-zero state, and it concludes that for reaching a target of 2 degrees Celsius limit, the globe should reach non-zero state by the year 2070 and by 2050 for a target of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Since then, more than 100 countries have announced their net zero intentions, and it is likely to be high on the agenda of COP26, which is going to be held towards the end of this year. Then the cost of renewables is falling rapidly. The reports indicate that during 8 years between 2010 to 2018, the cost has fallen by 87% for solar PV, 84% for batteries, and 47% of onshore wind, which is more relevant to us. The same biennial update report, which I talked earlier, brings out some certain interesting statistics. It reveals that the share of electricity generation is only 40% in the total GHG emissions in the country. Out of the remaining 60%, the industry is responsible for 22% and road transport for 9%. So if we want to reach net zero, we will have to shift some of these applications to green electricity. But then part of these are really hard to abate. For example, the process feed industry, the shipping, the aviation, the heavy transport, these may not be that easily amenable to electrification. And there, hydrogen may hold the promise. Hydrogen can be used as reducing agent in the process feed industry. It can be used as fuel for transport sector, especially heavy duty transport and shipping, etc. And recognizing that, Government of India has already launched hydrogen mission. Then there is one more interesting factor here. The enteric fermentation in the rumen of cattle is responsible for 8% GHG emissions in the country. Now this component cannot be really shifted to electricity. And then therefore carbon capture and storage may be the answer if we really want to achieve the net zero. And this technology right now suffers from high cost and consequently low deployment. Now this is a vicious circle. High cost leads to low demand, and because of low demand, the investment in technology is not encouraged, and also the benefit of economy of scale is not available. This vicious circle can be broken by the policy intervention by governments, by investing in technology development and encouraging initial deployment, which will soon lead to a positive feedback effect, the kind of situation, the kind of results we saw in the solar sector. Ultimately, it will be the optimum unit cost of electricity on the grid, which is going to determine the energy mix of future, because this cost captures system costs as well as transmission costs or storage costs along with the generation costs. While looking at the various technology options, it will be appropriate to have a look at the limitations as well. A recent study commissioned by ECR and Renew groups of European Union Parliament has come out with these numbers that solar needs 148 times more land compared to nuclear, and onshore wind needs 534 times more land compared to nuclear for generating the same amount of energy. Now let us have a look at the potential of nuclear. This slide shows the clean credentials of the nuclear. Nuclear is right there along with wind and hydro, with very low life cycle emissions per kilowatt hour. It is a base load dispatchable source capable of attaining very high plant load factors. It has, especially in India, in the context of India, it has potential to secure long-term energy security. And in my opinion, once we migrate to green hydrogen from the current predominantly gray hydrogen, hydrogen generation through nuclear route may be cost effective due to better utilization of assets, both of electricity generating assets as well as the electrolyzers. And future high temperature reactors may further accentuate this advantage. Nuclear power is characterized by high capital investment, long gestation periods, apprehensions about radiation, public apprehensions. Uncertainties stemming from public perception and political, regulatory, and technological aspects. Of course, it has the benefit of low operating costs and accordingly low marginal costs of production. But the bottom line is that to remain relevant, competitive tariff and viability of each project are essential. So far, I talked in general terms. Now I would like to shift to NPCIL as the utility representing nuclear sector in India. NPCIL is a AAA rated public sector undertaking with total assets in excess of 100,000 crore rupees and a net worth of about 40,000 crore rupees. It has got 22 reactors in operation with an installed capacity of 6,780 megawatt. Additionally, there are 8 more reactors under construction with 6,200 megawatt capacity. As informed by Lata sir, the first 700 megawatt indigenous unit, the Kakrapar 3 unit, has recently been connected to the grid on 10th January 2021. In addition, Government of India has accorded administrative approval and financial sanction for 12 more reactors with 9,000 megawatt capacity, and pre-project activities in regard to these reactors are in progress. This, just looking at the slide I just showed you, the previous slide, one can feel satisfied by the achievements of the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited since its inception in 1987 and the nuclear sector in general. But the fact is that the expectations are much higher, much bigger. And now there is a growing sense of impatience and disappointment with the pace of implementation of the program, pace of implementation of the growth program. And I accept this feedback with all humility without offering any explanation or justification. अन्यथा ये कहा जाएगा कि धूल चेहरे पे थी और शीशे को साफ करते रहे. These are some of the key challenges facing NPCIL. Maintaining competitive tariff, which has got 2 main elements: overnight cost of projects and gestation period. Early completion of pre-project activities. Delay here, although does not affect that much in terms of increased tariff or competitiveness of the tariff, but it severely affects the credibility of NPCIL and it dents our sense of ability. And that is why it is of utmost importance to complete the pre-project activities in the shortest possible time by working in a professional manner. These are basically 2 activities: land acquisition and rehabilitation and resettlement, and obtaining statutory clearances. Then when you have such a large growth program on hand, managing human resources and knowledge is going to be a challenge. Similarly, securing public support so that the implementation of the program remains smooth and nurturing sound safety culture are other key challenges. Now I will talk about each one to some extent. First, reducing the overnight cost. Although per megawatt cost of PSWRs, Indian PSWRs, is among the lowest, still it can further be reduced by standardization of design and repeating it in fleet mode, which will have further advantage of economy of numbers due to the block ordering possible in fleet mode implementation, and also the advantage of increased competition. The last 3 bullets, the ones read design optimization, modular construction, and further increasing the rated power will can definitely lead to cost reduction, but in direct conflict with the first bullet, that is standardization of design and repeating it in the fleet mode. And therefore, although we are going to work on developing these three measures, the real deployment will probably have to wait till the next fleet. And the one in between, restoration of mega project concessions, is of course a matter of policy. These concessions were earlier available to our projects, and with the implementation of GST, I believe that these got eliminated or withdrawn inadvertently, and that has increased the cost of implementation by about 18%. Delays in the construction lead to not only time overrun, but also to the cost overrun. And therefore it is of utmost importance to control, contain, and avoid the delays. These are some of the actions which NPCIL is taking or has taken to avoid delays. Requirement is to have timely stage-wise regulatory clearances. But we have recognized that clearances flow from timely submissions of good quality, and therefore now we are developing a standard plan and procedures to ensure that quality submissions are made at the right time. Then ensuring availability of good for construction engineering drawings before start of construction to avoid any disruptions and stoppage of the work later on and contractual disputes. Placing advance orders for long manufacturing cycle equipment with delivery schedules specified based upon previous experience. Fleet mode offers us flexibility in assigning equipment among the various projects which are being implemented. The project where the construction has advanced, the equipment can be assigned to that project on priority. We are going to incorporate approved QA plan in the tender itself. This will eliminate uncertainty with respect to the cost of quality assurance while bidding, and will eliminate the disputes later on. Then it is very important to exit from the non-performing contracts rather than continuing with them and suffering. Selecting partner companies for construction and EPC works is often the key to success. We are giving more importance to their financial health in pre-qualification criteria. Then we are working on optimizing the work packages, both scope as well as the numbers, based upon our previous experience of implementing Kakrapar and Rajasthan 7 and 8 units. We have put in place a system of monitoring at multiple levels going right up to the board, and the NPCIL board has created a subcommittee for project monitoring. So the monitoring is being now carried out in a very focused manner at multiple levels for timely identification of constraints and interventions. Then we are strengthening our project monitoring cell. We are holding frequent meetings with vendors and contractors to generate shared understanding about expectations, schedules, constraints, and countermeasures. Frequent and transparent communication with the regulator is very important in generating the trust and credibility of the utility, which is very important for smooth implementation of the projects. Coming to pre-project activities, we are preparing detailed plan of pre-project activities with interfaces and putting it on the project management software platform. Also, we are preparing the checklists and procedures for each activity. These two look very simple and obvious measures, but these two measures have been used by us in managing our biennial shutdown activities of operating units with very good success. And now we are going to use them in the pre-project activities as well. Then when we have so many projects going on at the same time, having more agencies for carrying out geotechnical studies, these are highly specialized studies, is of crucial importance. Our own Atomic Minerals Division can probably play a role here. Then, while conducting these field studies, prioritizing inputs for design basis ground motion and flow response spectra is necessary, because these two become input for the detailed engineering. Then, of course, it's a very simple thing, but it can be used with good effect to start these activities early, so that we have sufficient time, because some of the influencing agencies or implementing agencies in pre-project activities are not entirely in the control of NPCIL, or not influenceable, sometimes not even influenceable by NPCIL, like the public and public expectations during land acquisition, etc. Establishing empowered project office right from the beginning, which can effectively interact with the state authorities, statutory bodies, and other stakeholders like politicians, public leaders, opinion makers, etc. All these plans are ultimately going to be implemented by people, and therefore it is very important to have the right type of professionals available at the right place and at the right time. We already have reorganized ourselves and are having the technology specific verticals. Then, because of the remote location of our sites, attracting and retaining talent is a challenge, because the location of these sites away from the population centers, big cities, is not really to the liking of the younger generation. So some of the actions which we can take are, like, for attracting talent, why not recruit them before they complete their graduation, maybe 1 year in advance, by going to the campuses of reputed institutions and paying them stipend during the last year of their study as our employee. Then similarly, for retaining talent, we are contemplating examining the possibility of advertising the posts for regions, geographical regions. The idea is that when somebody is applying for a position, if he knows that he is applying for a job in southern region and therefore he is likely to be posted in Kalpakam, Kudankulam or Kaiga sites, he is less likely to be disappointed later on, and he will come with a mindset of acceptance. But then these are based upon our understanding or our analysis of the situation, which may not be entirely correct, and therefore a professional survey is being commissioned to better understand the aspirations of younger generation. Then our already strong culture of training, licensing and qualification has to continue. And since it takes a long time to prepare a nuclear professional who can start delivering, we may have to consider increasing the age of retirement to be able to implement this large growth program. Public acceptance is key to smooth operations, and this can be generated by public engagement through community, through opinion makers like public representatives, community elders, teachers, students, medical professionals, etc., and also by proactively generating awareness about the benefits which the region or the location or the area is likely to get because of the implementation of a nuclear power project here. For example, the prosperity it brings to the area, the potential for employment generation it has, and then continue on the continual basis the improvement in the infrastructure and facilities around the project initially and then station later on because of the spending on corporate social responsibility in the neighborhood. So far, I was talking about the actions to be taken by NPCIL. Now, I will be sharing some of my simple expectations from the industry partners. So far, whatever success NPCIL or nuclear sector has achieved is a combined, it is because of the combined efforts of both NPCIL and the industry partners. Without them, we cannot certainly succeed. And that is why these are my simple expectations from the industry partners. I want them to settle all issues during pre-bid meeting so that they can bid sensibly, which will be important for avoiding post-tender deviations and which will minimize need for extra contractual measures. Both these are tricky and time-consuming in a government setup. Then the expectation of maintaining adequate cash flow, that means managing their working capital, maintaining skilled and trained workforce, having robust quality control setup. These two bullets with respect to the workforce and quality are more from the manufacturers than the contractors. And the last but not the least, ensure safety of the workmen and ensure timely payment of wages to the workmen. Because any industrial accident or any agitation by workers because of the non-payment of wages affects our credibility in the neighborhood very badly, because they know NPCIL there. And that is why I want the contracting partners to pay particular attention to these two very important aspects. Nuclear cannot survive as an option without overriding priority to safety. This is my firm belief, because as an operator and as a nuclear professional, I believe that this is the first and this is the foremost requirement. And the cornerstone to this is, or the foundation stone to this is, the need to nurture culture where every employee considers safety as her or his responsibility. And this is the toolkit being deployed by NPCIL to develop and nurture this work culture, this safety culture. I would like your particular attention to intolerance to degraded conditions and independent oversight, which are very important in nurturing a sound safety culture. I am very happy while projecting this slide. This shows the public doors or the annual dose to a hypothetical person who will be living at the boundary of our exclusion zone continuously for a year. See, against the limit of ARV prescribed limit of 1000 microsievert, the actual numbers are very, very low, ranging from 28 microsievert for Rawat Bhatta to 0.004 microsievert for Kudankulam. If I ignore both these outliers, the mean is more like this, about 0.3, 0.25 to 0.3 microsievert per twin unit station. And I often tell to the people that living continuously at the fence of Kaiga for 1 year will give you the same amount of radiological dose which you will get by eating 6 numbers of banana one time. So it proves the point that the incremental dose, because of our power stations in the area, is insignificantly low, because the natural background is as high as 2400 on an average. In areas, it is very high. There are areas in Kerala, in our own country. There is a place called Ramsar in Iran, where this natural background is as high as 0.1 Sievert. And this slide shows our ability to operate the units continuously for long duration. So far, NPCIL units have operated 35 times for more than a year and 4 times for more than 2 years, topped by Kaiga generating unit number 1, which operated continuously for 962 days before being shut down for biennial shutdown in a planned manner, and thus created a world record in the year 2018. The right side of slide is not for the audience, it is more for myself. Now that takes me to the last slide of my presentation, the SWOT analysis of NPCIL. If we talk about the strengths, green credentials of its product and sound domain knowledge are strengths of the NPCIL, or rather more noteworthy strengths of NPCIL. Looking at weaknesses, availability of limited vendors, and that is why the supply chain in general is one weakness. And the other weakness, important weakness, is technological limitation of PSWRs with respect to meeting the expectations for migrating to availability-based tariff design. Then growing electricity demand in the country. I remember Dr. Kakodkar and Dr. Grover during earlier talks had forecast that India is likely to, or India should be reaching, to meet its developmental needs, it should be reaching the level of 5,000 units per capita per annum from the current level of 1,200 units per capita per annum. So there is going to be a huge demand for electricity generation. And climate change concepts are going to open new opportunities, new preferences, new, I will say, enabling environment for nuclear electricity. It is only up to us to prepare ourselves to take full advantage of these opportunities. And of course, the threat is falling tariffs of renewable energy and the storage technology, or maybe some other technological breakthrough. think that is all from me. Thank you for attention. I believe I completed within allotted 45 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharma, for this interesting talk. And before we take up question answers, let me share some my views on certain things. The point which I would like to make is that nuclear power was growing very fast around the globe. And at that point of time, there was a strong policy support from the governments. And if we analyze the incidents in the recent past, many from nuclear industry are trying to say exactly the same thing. I think maybe I can share my presentation on this. Maybe Rahul, can you authorize me to share the presentation?
Now you.
Yeah. Okay. So let me see this. Yeah. On, the first one is a working paper from IMF, released just a few days back, that is on 19th March. It is titled Building Back Better, How Big Are Clean Spending Multipliers, where they have used the concept of Keynesian multiplier to measure the economic impact of investments in clean energy. Specifically, the working paper notes that spending on clean energy like solar, wind, or nuclear has an impact on GDP that is about 2 to 7 times stronger, depending on the technology and the horizon under consideration, than spending on non-eco-friendly energy sources like oil, gas, and coal. And about this report, one of the authors, Ms. Bathini, who is the lead evaluator of the IMF Independent Evaluation Office, said, the study finds that every dollar that we spent in the past on key carbon neutral or carbon sink activities from zero emission power plants and, for example, nuclear plants, and to the protection of wildlife and ecosystem can generate more than $1 worth of economic activity. So this is the advantage of investing in green technologies like nuclear. The second is a report, Road to EU Climate Neutrality by 2050 by ECR Group and Renew Europe. These two NGOs are stationed in Brussels. And this report, Sharmaji referred to in his talk when he talked about the land requirement for solar and wind. And this report concludes that with regard to land requirement as well as cost, nuclear power offers substantial advantages over solar and wind. It estimates that in case of the Netherlands, the land requirement for total reliance on solar and wind will be more than the area of the Netherlands. I may add that I'm quoting specifically Netherlands because it is densely populated country, as dense as India. It has a density of population of 423 as 411 of India. And this report has been reviewed by very eminent experts. And these reports have been studied in within European Union, and 6 heads of the states, including Czech Republic, French Republic, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Slovak Republic, and Republic of Slovenia, they have written a letter to on nuclear power so as to frame the EU climate and energy policy. And I just quote one sentence from this particular letter. This letter is also dated 19th March. We are convinced that all available zero and low emission technologies that contribute to climate neutrality while supporting other energy policy objectives should not only be recognized but also actively supported by the European Union. This is especially valid for nuclear power, whose development is one of the primary objectives of the treaty establishing Euratom Community, and so on. A strong support for nuclear power from 6 countries of European Union. Fourth is an article published in Nuclear Engineering International, dated 22nd March 2021. It is about Russia including nuclear in the draft green taxonomy. Now, green taxonomy is a kind of report in which the countries are listing those technologies and activities which qualify as green and to which policy supports like tax concessions, etc., are given. So Russia has already included nuclear in the draft green taxonomy. There was a taxonomy prepared by European Union. It was referred to Joint Research Center with regard to evaluation of nuclear. The report of JRC is being evaluated. It was submitted by them only, I think, 3 or 4 days back. The report has been leaked, and this leaked report strongly recommends including nuclear in green taxonomy of European Union. And I just want to inform that this topic of which technologies to be included is becoming very important. Today afternoon, from 3:30 to 6:30, International Energy Agency and COP26, they are organizing a net zero summit. We have to listen to this summit to know what exactly they are saying. And as all of you might have read in the newspapers, that President Biden is inviting 40 world leaders, including Prime Minister of India, for a summit related to use of or deployment of low carbon technology, and that is scheduled for 22nd and 23rd April. So this is a very important topic. The technologies which have been identified as green by IPCC, that is solar, wind, hydro, and nuclear, how they have to be deployed. This is something which is under debate. With this, I end here, and now we can move on to question answer session. I hope there will be, I think must be several questions. For you, Sharmaji, the first question is on hydrogen generation, the threshold of nuclear plant is 3,000 megawatts. What is the strategy in Indian context to catch up for hydrogen economy as per the international standards from Dr. R.K. Singh?
Well, very interesting it is. At the moment, if we see the hydrogen production in the country, about more than 95% of the hydrogen is being produced by steam forming of hydrocarbons. And the green hydrogen, which is of course carbon dioxide generating technology, it is the gray hydrogen, it is polluting. And the green hydrogen, which is produced by electrolysis of water, is about 3 times as expensive. So unless there is a migration from gray hydrogen to green hydrogen, the hydrogen generated through electrolysis will really not be deployed in the large scale. So once we move in the direction of net zero and migrate to green hydrogen, then in my opinion, there will be only 2 sources for powering these electrolyzers, either renewable energy sources or nuclear energy. Renewable energy sources, they suffer with the intermittent nature or low utilization of assets. So both the power station as well as the electrolyzer assets will be suboptimally utilized here, and nuclear with its very high load factors, capacity factors, should be having an edge compared to these technologies. I have not undertaken any analytical study about this aspect, but this is my gut feeling. And also, we all know that the high temperature reactors have got the potential for further lowering the cost of hydrogen production or the cost of green hydrogen production, because then we will be having the electrolysis of a steam at high temperature and the requirement of energy will come down.
Yes, thank you. I think this fact that electrolyzer is a capital intensive equipment and using it intermittently will mean utilization of asset. That's a very important part, which perhaps is not well articulated in the literature. So I move on to next question from Mr. Joy Shah. Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Project management is essential aspect of viability of project. What is project schedule expected from concept to commissioning with all such measures mentioned by you?
I will divide the total duration of implementation into two parts: pre-project activities and actual construction. We say that the construction starts with the first pour of concrete or first pour of nuclear concrete, and our expectation of time for completing a 700 megawatt reactor project is 5 years since start of construction, that is the first pour of concrete. Now, coming to the pre-project activities, which happen before the first pour of concrete, it is difficult to assign a timeline because some of the factors have a large portion of uncertainty associated, like land acquisition.
Yes.
The land acquisition and the field investigations with respect to the geotechnical investigations. Sometimes the local population allows us to carry out geotechnical investigations in parallel with the shifting of population, that is the land acquisition. Sometimes they protest and they want first them to be properly and satisfactorily relocated and rehabilitated before allowing us to start the geotechnical studies. And this makes a lot of difference. So it is difficult to put a timeline there because everything is not within the control of the decision. But I am sure that with the measures which I was talking about, very simple things, we should be able to complete from inception to start of construction all these activities within something like 2.5 to 3 years.
There's a question again on hydrogen by Dr. Bentayat. Is NPCIL planning to invest in developing or acquiring large-scale hydrogen production technology?
Sir, I would like to submit here that hydrogen is the technology of future to be deployed across the sectors. And generally, it is beyond the capability of corporations like NPCIL to lead the effort for technology development. To my mind, it is primarily the responsibility of the government agencies and educational institutions to lead the effort. NPCIL may play a very minor role befitting its status. But the real difference can be made only by the policy intervention, enablers from the government agencies. And I think this has been recognized by the government of India, and that is why the hydrogen mission has been launched by the government. And to my mind, the beginning made in this direction, in the right earnest right now, can give India the lead, the kind of lead China is enjoying in the solar PV sector.
Yes. Okay. I request all the people who want to ask questions to write their question in Q&A site, and we'll take them one by one. There's another question from Mr. Joy Shah. What is carbon emission per kilowatt hour of nuclear power for complete supply chain?
That is, I I showed a slide which clearly brings out that as per a study carried out by IPCC, the lifetime emission because of nuclear is 12 gram of carbon dioxide equivalent per unit electricity produced or per kilowatt hour. This is and the same number for wind is 11 and for tidal it is I think 28.
Yes, so our solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, they are in a comparable range. I think then I move on to question by Dr. R.K. Singh again, whether the land requirement for nuclear as compared with other sources include the exclusion distance. Our new reactor design, where we may be able to build reactors in cities, whether exclusion zone distance is accounted for in land requirements.
Sir, if you are talking about the study commissioned by the ECR and Renew groups of the European Union Parliament, I do not really know that how they have arrived at these numbers, but I can tell from the experience of NPCIL. We acquire something like 800 hectares of the land for locating a 6-unit nuclear power park, say Jatapur. It will be having more than 10,000 megawatt there, more than 10 gigawatt there, and the land acquired is for the plant is something like 800 hectares. You compare it with the requirement of land for solar, the literature available openly, I have no direct experience, but the literature available openly suggests that the requirement is something like 5 hectares per megawatt. So you can compare it, and then this is based upon only the installed capacity. We are talking about the electricity generation, energy generation. So if we factor in the higher PLF of nuclear,
yes,
then this difference in the requirement of land becomes still more significant.
Okay. Next is how nuclear power generation facilities protected from natural calamities, and what is the destination for nuclear waste? This is asked by 2 persons. Nuclear waste is from 2 persons.
See, nuclear waste is often discussed in the context of nuclear power. See, the implications of managing nuclear waste are different for India and different for many other countries. India pursues a closed fuel cycle with reprocessing of used fuel. And with this reprocessing and deployment of the second stage breeder reactors, the waste generated will get reduced to something like about 2%. And that waste also is likely to be subjected to partitioning and to beneficial uses in society. Already we are using the radiation facilities for treating the eye cancers and things like that by extracting the radioisotopes from the waste produced in the nuclear reactors or the spent fuel produced discharge from the nuclear reactors. But I am not really an expert on waste management. Maybe others can speak much better than
I think this is very clear. The waste from nuclear is much less than the waste from other methods of power generation. And there is another part of this question: how nuclear power generation facility is protected from natural calamities. You refer to that ground motion spectra and all those things. Maybe this is what he wants to know in more detail.
Yes. See, this is by designing. We assess the site very extensively for potential for the natural calamities like earthquake, like the tsunami, the tidal waves, and the that kind of things. And we study the historical data very extensively to arrive at the design basis parameters. And then the design is carried out based upon this design basis with an element of conservatism. And then our designs are reviewed by a variety of experts at multiple levels before the site is accepted and approved for locating a nuclear facility.
Another question, Manmohan Sobti, what is the operating range of existing nuclear power stations and any modification of operating range of the newly installed 700 megawatt units? I do not know operating range, what exactly is meant by this. Can you make out or?
Operating range.
Yeah.
Are you
I think we can request Mr. Sobti, can you reword the question and type it again? In the meanwhile, we'll move to the next question. This is from Dr. Indira Priyadarshini. While considering the profit for NPCIL, do you also include the R&D support provided by other DAs? Hello. R&D support.
Sir, we missed your voice for some time. Can you repeat it?
While considering the profit for NPCIL, do you also include R&D support provided by other DA units?
We do not really quantify the R&D from other DA units, but the technology or the design and development of technology is primarily being done within NPCIL.
Yes.
The contribution of R&D centers is for developing the technology, and that is available to everybody. It is not only for NPCIL. They are creating the knowledge. They are doing the scientific work to improve the knowledge about the materials, their behaviors, the analysis of systems under various stress conditions, and that knowledge is available to everybody. We also use it. We also get benefited by using it.
Okay, then I think she has a comment. Excellent talk and review by Dr. Sharma. I move on to the next question by Dr. Raj Mishra. Is the desired human resource available for nuclear power?
Sir, I spent some time dwelling upon the challenges of attracting and retaining the talent. And this primarily is the concern at our sites which are located remotely. There is no shortage of the pool, the talent pool in the country. But our sites somehow do not figure with a lot of priority with the younger generation, because we are located away from the population centers, big cities, and then the opportunities for the spouse of working professionals are limited at that location. So there are challenges, practical challenges associated with us. And that is why I indicated that we are undertaking a comprehensive survey by a professional agency to understand the aspirations and to design the countermeasures so that we are still able to attract and retain.
I move on to the question by Dr. Hegde. Basically, it's more of a comment. I feel more cohesive interactions between the various departments like civil, electrical, instrumentation, and mechanical during design approval is most important for timely approvals of designs and drawings.
Sir, I could not agree less with you. You have said very aptly, and I think that is the wisdom, and we all must definitely be adopting it and working to generate the right kind of synergy between various
Yeah. He continues further, one of the impediments for maintaining cash flow by the contractor is the billing schedule, which is frozen in a tender, that the payments are at the rear end. Will they need to look into it fresh?
Sir, we are really obtaining the feedback from the industry partners. We have had many vendor meets with them to understand their expectations. And also, that is what I was hinting, that during the pre-bid meeting, if there are any structural flaws in the tender, they can be discussed and they can be corrected in a transparent manner. That is what I was indicating, that I want them to take the pre-bid meeting platform more seriously so that we arrive at an equitable contract which is workable.
Yes. Next, he is asking a question: will this presentation be available to INA fellows? Yes. Answer is yes. I think it will be there on the service. I will take care of this. So this should be available to INA fellows as well as INS members. Then Ritu Agarwal is asking how the international collaborations with Russia and France are affecting India's nuclear power program.
They are the additionalities. The light water reactor program, which is being implemented in the collaboration of Russia and being contemplated in collaboration with France, USA, is an additionality. The PSWR program will remain the mainstay program of the country, but for rapid increase of the installed capacity, these technologies will also be deployed in the country.
Earlier, I read a question from Dr. Manmohan Sobhuti regarding operating range. Now it clarifies that by operating range, I mean whether the plant is to be run at 100% PLF or a range between 60 to 100% PLF, as in the case of thermal power stations.
So see, now what probably Mr. Sobhuti is hinting at is the load following capability, or adjusting the output according to the demands of the frequency. Well, nuclear power stations in their current design, especially the pressurized high water reactors, are not very amenable to the two-shift operation or the load following kind of operation. We do have limited capability of adjusting the output, but not twice a day basis or once a day basis or maybe 3 times a week basis, because we have the full performance and the xenon transition.
There is a question on waste again by Dr. Hari Ablani. How is the nuclear waste disposed? What is the half-life of the waste? How do you ensure the safety of the surrounding community?
Sir, the nuclear waste is a very general term. I will divide it into 2 parts, or rather 3 parts. One is the low level waste, and other is intermediate level waste,
Yes.
and third is the high level waste. High level waste means the waste which has got high specific activity. And high level waste primarily comes from the spent nuclear fuel or used nuclear fuel. Used nuclear fuel, as I indicated earlier also, in India we do not consider used nuclear fuel as the waste. We consider it as a resource, and that is why there is an active program of reprocessing the spent nuclear fuel, the used nuclear fuel, to extract all the usable components and put them to reuse in the second generation program or for the therapeutic uses. After doing all this, the volume of this remaining waste is significantly reduced to about 2%, which is being stored for future technological deployment, like partitioning or burning it in the ADS driven systems, on which the work is going on, active work is going on. Coming to the low level waste and the intermediate level waste, here the half-lives are small, the activity levels are small, and they are managed rather, not disposed, they are managed at the site itself in such a manner that by the time the life of the plant is over, the remaining activity, residual activity of this waste also becomes negligible.
Okay, so there is a comment from Karkera, Narayan Karkera. He writes that we could investigate hybrid power plants. Please see my IAEA paper in September 2019 conference. Okay, this is just a comment. Hybrid nuclear power plants. I do not know what exactly how we define hybrid power plants. Then XK Malhotra is writing. I'm not able to send my question. Please allow me to ask directly in the chat. And then this I will take up later on. First, the question: possibility of exporting nuclear power plants from India by question from Dr. Virendra Joshi.
Sir, I will simplify the question. Are we having the capability of exporting the power plants? Yes, we have the capability. We have the reactor models which are very competitive economically. But then there are other aspects of trade in the nuclear sector. There is a question of NSG. There is a question of the responsibility of the used fuel. There is a question of taking the responsibility for fuel supply. So some of these are not really within the domain of NPCIL, and they are within the bigger framework of policy.
Yes, it's the government decision basically. So I think I think we can hold that question. Now Mr. Malhotra wants to ask us question orally. Mr. Malhotra, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. And Sharma ji, first let me compliment you for a wonderful lecture. And as you mentioned, आपने एक शेर बोला था, तो वहीं से क्यों लेते हुए my question is very simple. See, we have already spent 2 decades of this century. I want you to compare these 2 decades with respect to NPCIL's performance in project implementation and project completion. You know, I will just give you a clue. In the first decade of this century, NPCIL completed 10 reactors, 4 of which were launched in the previous decade, but 6 of them were launched in the same decade and completed in the same decade, which included the 2 540 megawatt reactors, which were completed in record time. So basically my question is, what is the difference between NPCIL of that time and today's time? I mean, gestation period is too much presently. How it was lower in that first decade? Kindly answer this.
Sir, very provocative question. You referred to the share I recited. There is another one share, which I will start with. Here the Shire says, चाहे सोने की फ्रेम में जड़ दो, आईना झूठ बोलता ही नहीं. With this, I will stop now. Sir, you are very correct that in the first decade, we were implementing the projects in time. It is not only Tarapur 3 and 4, the Kaiga 3 and 4, Rajasthan 5 and 6, all these projects were completed with cost savings rather than cost overrun. Then came, we faltered only with the implementation of Kakrapar 3-4, Rajasthan 7 and 8. And there are a variety of reasons for that. Let me tell you they share some of them, some of the regions with you. Number one, these reactors were first of its kind, and 4 of them were launched together. So not only we, but the manufacturers, the industry partners, they were also learning. So we were all going through a learning curve. I will just give you one example, sir. Take the example of steam generators. For Kakrapar 3, 4, Rajasthan 7 and 8, we placed the order in 2009 with a delivery schedule of 5 years. And the first steam generator was delivered with a delay of 3 years, over and above the 5 years. And the last is yet to be delivered. So that is the kind of thing which happened with respect to manufacturing nuclear grade equipment for these first of a kind reactors of this scale. Now, what is the difference? We placed the order for the same type of steam generators for GHAVP 1 and 2, and the first steam generator has already been delivered with a saving of 1 year. Here we gave 4-year time, and it has been delivered in 3 years. So that means everybody needed to learn, not only we, the industry as well, to manufacture equipment of this type. And then when there are gaps in the orders, the manufacturing industry loses the skilled manpower, the shop floors are assigned to some other jobs, and then if you give the order, it takes time to gather the momentum. But now with the implementation of fleet mode, I don't expect the similar kind of thing to happen. This is one. Then came in between, in 2011, Fukushima happened, which necessitated a relook at the very basics of the design. And we changed our design basis almost, which needed redoing the engineering. This all created work stoppages, slowing down of the work, and disruptions. So these are the main factors, and of course I hinted that now we have taken. See, during the last decade, there was a trend not only in India but world over to go for parallel engineering. Now we all have learned our lessons, and now we want to start the construction only after good for construction engineering drawings are available. I think that is in a nutshell, sir. We can continue the discussion later on also.
Thank you, Sharmaji. This was very interesting lecture. There are comments here in the chat box, like excellent webinar and lightning webinar. This I'm conveying to you. I didn't read them all. So thank you. It was a very good lecture. And I now pass on the mic to Dr. Manchanda for his concluding remarks.
Gross, am I audible?
Yes, audible. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Gross, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead. But your video is off. But you are audible.
Hello. Okay. So before I say anything, our President Mehtaji wants to make a comment, please.
Okay, please go ahead.
Well, thank you for that. First of all, let me congratulate Sharmaji for a very relevant aspect that he has brought out. I must say that he was speaking from his heart, bringing all the issues that is required to be done. There are a few things that I would like to make an observation, that if you want to change any siting criteria and all the things there, yes, I agree that they are very relevant. But the public which is opposing the nuclear power, will not be in a we should be comfortable situation. So we have to find some different situation. To me, economics is one factor, safety is another one. These are the two things. Economics, I think we have to view it in a different way. Today, Tarapur 1 and 2 are generating perhaps the cheapest power in India. So I think we have to see how the thing situations are there. And the same thing will be relevant when our other power station also come to the last stage of the aging and all the things that were there. So the question is not, let us not be too concerned about the safety, the economics that much, as much as from the safety aspect of that. Now, you have no choice if there is some mid-course correction are there, like that of what happened in Fukushima. So once that has happened, it has all the projects which are ongoing have to be reviewed in lieu of that. In my view, Fukushima, I would say that for the man-made thing that Fukushima, Daiichi was in a problem, but Diana successfully countered the whole situation. So there was safety provision which were not being perhaps implemented well in stage with a good warning that one. So I'm sure the NPCL is having a good safety culture and will maintain the safety culture in operating the whole thing there. I would also think whether we can think in terms of future consortium with the industry. Whether that is a possibility in the situation that one. I know the government of India may be having different views, but I think one has to at some stage think in terms of consortium where the financial situation has to be kept in mind. It is also a thing that one should see that whether this small modular reactor can be considered, particularly for sites which are abandoned from the coal-based power stations. I feel the factory assembled power station, which can be operated in a self-standing situation and all in synchronous with the other power station that one can make an impact, particularly when we are thinking in the remote areas. So I think there are many things that one has to look into it. But I must again congratulate you on bringing out these very specific issues. And I would want to repeat that you spoke of your heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Mehtaji. In fact, there is one particular lecture I remember I have heard Mehtaji on this small module reactors actually. In fact, Sharmaji, when he was listing down the problematic area of high capital cost, high gestation period, radiation fear, I thought a lot of such things can be addressed by that favorite topic of Mehtaji. So I hope somewhere, because I also read that a lot of countries, they are also thinking seriously in this direction. I hope one day NPCL also will look into this, whether it is doable in our country. But let me come back to the acknowledging the work which has been done by a lot of people in making this webinar a successful event. To start with, once again, of course, it is a privilege to thank Shri S.K. Sharma, the man who is leading from the front, man in the center of action. It is very difficult, and the pressure that you have of office to find time for this interaction, but I think he does contribute to the idea that the awareness among the peers as well as the public is an important part of the assignment actually. So thank you very much for finding out time. And I also know there is a pressure of sharing the figures and data. So I think you have done it very successfully. So I would like to thank you on behalf of both INS as well as INAE. And coming back to the organizers, it is a again privilege for me to thank our partner, the President INAE, the President Local Chapter INAE, Lieutenant Colonel Shobhit Rai, Deputy Executive Director INAE and ITCL, and Mr. Rohit particularly for making the wonderful arrangement for this webinar. And I don't know where I should put Dr. Grover, who has played a key role in bringing the two organizations together. So thank you, Dr. Grover. So let me come back to acknowledging the work done by INS. I like to thank the President, Secretary, Treasurer, and also I understand initially Dr. Tiwari, who is our INS webinar committee convener, he also talked to Sharma ji, and finally this event has happened. I will also like to thank all the EC members and above all the participants, both from the INS side as well as from the INI side, but for whom this program would not have been this successful. In fact, Dr. Grover had a problem in reading out all the questions. I think the questions were many, that shows the interest of the attendees. So thank once again all those who helped in facilitating this webinar. Thank you very much.